The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for 9 Energy Service seamlessly integrates quote to cash with FieldFX and Boomi. My name is Emily Rhodes. I'm the Director of Marketing at Liquid Frameworks, and I will be acting as the moderator today. So first, let's start with the housekeeping notes. We've muted the phone lines today to avoid any interruptions during the presentation. We will, however, allow time for a short question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So if you have a question, please enter it in the question section on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will answer it at the close of the presentation. If we don't have time for all of the questions, we'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar. Next, I'd like to introduce our speakers. First, we have the team from 9 Energy Service: Sean Barnes, VP of IT and Business Solutions, Ryan Loudermilk, Senior Manager of Digital Business, and Victor Perez, Manager, Operations Applications. From the Liquid Framework side, we have Matt White, Senior Solutions Engineer. So today we have an integration story to share with you. 9 Energy Service is going to showcase how they leverage Boomi integration to integrate FieldFX to their ERP and the resulting benefits they're receiving. But first, I'm going to turn things over to Matt White to give us an intro to FieldFX and discuss the process from a high level. Matt?
Thank you, Emily, and good afternoon, everyone. So what I want to walk through is a few slides looking at Liquid Frameworks at a glance at a high level. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the industries that we serve, and they can be broken into 3 main segments. The first is the oil field services. These are many of our customers operating at a well site in many different service lines through the life cycle of a well, whether it's wireline, pressure pumping, artificial lift, many different service lines within the industry. Along with that would be the industrial services, where they're at a facility location, maybe doing large, long-term project turnaround services, or maybe day-to-day operations at a facility. And then finally, environmental services, where these are typically emergency response, whether it's spill cleanup or fire response, but also certain services that just have to occur on routine, cleanups that are required within the industry. But underneath all of these industries that we serve, are the very common threads that we facilitate with FieldFX. And those are time and materials capture throughout all the industries. Typically, they're scheduling crews and equipment, making sure that the right people are available, have the right certifications, best fit for what work needs to be performed. And then finally, performing this work offline, disconnected from the internet. So all of these industries ultimately have field users that are going on location, completely disconnected from the internet, but still need to be recording a lot of information around billing, safety form data capture, time, payroll information, all while still being safe and accurate on location, and then ultimately synchronizing that data back into the back office so it can be processed for different purposes, whether it's billing, payroll, maintenance, all that occurs within the world of FieldFX. Next, we're going to look at a high-level current process that we see with many, many of our customers from the very beginning of that customer engagement, where they will many times be utilizing the FieldFX customer self-service portal. They might be putting in things like service requests, looking at new proposals or bids, or even signing tickets and reviewing that. That information would flow into sales if, say, it was a new service request or a new request for bid. Sales would be utilizing our configure price quote or CPQ module to make the most accurate bid or proposal at the very beginning of that process, passing it through a number of workflow steps, approval processes. But instead of having to pass that via email or other paper processes, we simply move the data forward in operations once that bid is won, where we're simply enriching the data, where operations now would take all this information, find out from sales, okay, we're needing these types of roles and people on location. Let me use schedule and dispatch module to find the right people with the right certification that meet those needs and get them scheduled on the board very quickly and efficiently. And again, all this information is passed to the field role, where they're going to disconnect from the internet. They're going to continue enriching more information, what exactly occurred during the time of service. Safety forms have to be collected, activity logs, photos may be captured. All that information is ultimately packaged up and synced back, where it would go through an approval process to get into the accounting role, where they ultimately would have that FX invoicing where they could package this all up, create an invoice and submit it to a customer and get that, billed paid faster. All of this lives within the world of FieldFX and that streamlined quote to cash process. But we also understand that outside this bubble are a lot of other applications that have to exist within an organization. And to bring that world together, we have a wonderful partner, Boomi, who layers in their framework, as they call it. This is where they have things such as the master data hub. They have integration connection points to systems and applications. They have a catalog of data that you can utilize and tap into. They can also help manage your EDI transactions. So a lot of our customers come to us to discuss this topic, and Boomi is a great partner to help with that. API management, and then business flow. So making sure that as the data is pushed back and forth between different systems, it's going through the right approval steps, it's going through the right checks and balances. So when it needs to go from one system to another, it's done at the right time with the right information and done correctly and accurately. And then you'll also see that Boomi has this world of engagement where they would take things from the web or social, analytics, IoT, pass it through that framework in the middle. They connect all these systems together so you can run your business on the far right there, whether you're looking at cloud applications, on-prem, different types of systems ultimately would be connected and communicating back and forth through these systems. Now, looking at this from a integrated solution perspective, so seeing this where you would have FieldFX in the middle of that hub, the Boomi integration and framework wrapped around that layer, and then bolting into different systems, whether that might be an ERP, which we'll hear from 9 Energy today about their experience, payroll systems, GPS systems, IoT sensors. So this might be, tank readers that are feeding back information about tank levels. Even legacy systems could be ultimately integrated in, but being able to connect all of this together to communicate to help improve business processes. What benefits would this ultimately provide are very key to our customers around things like contract compliance. So streamlining that price book management, enhancing that customer experience and service. So ensuring that whether the data is starting in the ERP with a full built price book or simply the catalog item master is brought into FieldFX and we're enriching it with all the price book data inside FieldFX, we're ensuring that we're not having to rekey data, that all the items are correctly inputted, and we're just utilizing the best data that we have. And then, of course, this is feeding into our invoice accuracy. So ensuring that we have faster revenue capture, enhanced cash flow. So from that contract compliance, we get better invoicing. We can streamline our processes to ensure the accuracy is done from a very early stage. So all of the workflow that we talked about earlier just is passing that data through FieldFX from beginning to end, and then ultimately into other systems that need it. And then metrics, insight into analytics that we may need. So making those strategic decision-making processes or efficiency of resources. So being able to bring in other systems into FieldFX to see not only what information we have from an ERP perspective, but maybe GPS of what's the closest nearby asset, what's already on location, what IoT sensors are feeding us around hours ran on, say, a pump. So we can feed all this information and make the best decision for, well, this asset's coming up for maintenance in a week. I'm not going to schedule it on a 3-month job. I'm going to choose the other asset that just finished its maintenance. So making those strategic decisions right there at the time of schedule and dispatch. And then eliminating these system silos. So being able to bring multiple systems together and communicate, where before you may have been logging into system A, system B, so on, and trying to find the answer to a question, you can now bring this data together and streamline that process. That information can travel between applications and ensuring accuracy and not wasting time trying to find a simple answer to a question. And then ultimately, that enhanced field management. So being able to increase the field accuracy, operational productivity. So having your field know that all the data they're receiving when they go offline is accurate the first time. All they have to worry about is the job on hand and capturing what actually occurred at time of service. All of that ultimately comes back full circle, back to that contract compliance and invoice accuracy step. And then finally, just a sample of customers that today are utilizing FieldFX with an integration between us and different types of systems. And like I mentioned, this could be things such as an ERP, GPS, IoT sensors, all of this data ultimately living in that hub and that framework combined with FieldFX and Boomi. And for today, I'm going to pass it over to 9 Energy, where they're going to share their story about their experience.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So next up, we have Ryan Loudermilk from 9 Energy Service, who is going to introduce us to 9 and share their FieldFX story. Ryan?
Thanks, Emily. Let me get my presentation up here. All right. So we are 9 Energy Service. I am, of course, Ryan Loudermilk, the Senior Manager of Digital Business, and I'm joined by Victor Perez, our Manager of Operations Applications. And we're going to talk to you today about our experience integrating our ERP with FieldFX using Boomi. So first, a little bit of background about who 9 Energy is. We are an OFS company. We compete in the wireline, cementing, coiled tubing, and completion tools segments. We are FieldFX customers in our cementing division going back to 2016 and expanded that to our wireline division shortly thereafter, and currently utilize Boomi for both. And we're evaluating rolling it out to our other groups, but they are not currently on it. 9 Energy was formed through a long history of M&A transactions, cobbling together a bunch of smaller companies, and being formally founded in 2013. One of the biggest events in our history that you can see here was at the beginning of 2018, we went public. So that's heavily shaped our technology department's outlook through the controls that were imposed upon us through SOX compliance. So knowing this is a goal of ours from the beginning, the primary focus of the IT group has been to try and unify our platforms and to push people into singular applications to ease communication between all of these disparate locations and business units. So systems such as FieldFX and Boomi have really helped us to run as lean as possible in a very competitive OFS space while maintaining the SOX controls that we've had to develop to satisfy our auditors and help mitigate risk within the business. So you can see here just the sheer spread geographically of locations that 9 Energy has. Through the various fluctuations in the industry, we've had headcounts as high as 2,500 and up to 48 locations spread throughout the United States and Canada. So well-designed systems and processes and as much automation as possible is really necessary to unify such a diffuse workforce and help to improve communication. Obviously, cloud-based systems have been a big boon to us and is part of our philosophy as a technology department because it allows us to centralize data management while minimizing our on-prem infrastructure, as well as being easily scalable given those pretty frequent fluctuations in activity in the space. So I want to get into a little bit about why we chose Boomi as an integration platform for FieldFX. We initially started out our integration journey with FieldFX using a third-party integration built by one of our NetSuite partners, NetSuite being our ERP system. This proved to be pretty difficult to manage as it was somewhat of a black box to us. It resided in our third party's data center. They built the code. They had all the documentation on it. Any changes required statements of work and a lot of communication back and forth, and we could only make changes as quickly as they could work for us. So we wanted to bring something in-house that we could manage ourselves, that we'd have full visibility into, and small little tweaks here and there could be implemented much more quickly than having to go through some formal process with a third party. So one of the biggest things about Boomi is that it's a low-code solution. So it allows non-programmers to easily maintain it, and non-technical people to really understand it. So we'll get into this some in the demo, but Boomi has a really nice graphical layout that makes it very easy to follow the flow of data throughout a process. Additionally, given how lean we have to run as a company to be competitive in our space, we may not always have the particular technology expert on staff. So having a solution that someone with somewhat of a technical background could step in, learn relatively quickly, and then go on and maintain was really important to us. It puts control into our hands. Like I said, this replaced that third-party integration. So it allows us to make those quick and easy changes. It allows us to adjust the scheduling for how often particular processes run, or to manually kick them off if we have a hot request to sync over an item, or if we need to get a sales order updated really quickly from FieldFX, we can just manually kick those off on our own, and we're not prisoners to the scheduling set by some third-party system. It allows us a single source of truth. So this is really big for us when it comes to our SOX compliance. We can maintain all of our master data within NetSuite, including the controls and the approval processes that we've taken the time and resources to build there, and effectively extend those to the master data that's then populating into FieldFX. So we don't have to build duplicate controls. We're not doing data entry multiple times, and we're allowing the business owners of that data, whether it's inventory specific or financial data, whether customer accounts, and it allows those business owners to manage the data in a system they're familiar with. And then, of course, the reduction of errors and duplication. So this is going to apply to really any automation and integration solution, to where our master data is seamlessly transmitted from our source of truth in NetSuite to FieldFX. We don't have to worry about the two systems being disparate from each other, or having an item in FieldFX that can't find its related item within NetSuite on the integration. And then, of course, reducing manual entry is always going to be a bonus in reducing opportunity for error. So the processes that we're going to run through today in Boomi is going to be the synchronization of our item master data, customer records, and employee contacts. That's all going to come from NetSuite to FieldFX. And then in the other direction, we're going to create sales orders in NetSuite using our ticket information from FieldFX, and then update those line items accordingly throughout the job and ticket progress. But a little bit of preface information to make the demo make a little bit of sense, since we can't run through every bit of it. I mentioned earlier how our cementing and wireline divisions are both currently utilizing FieldFX and Boomi, but they're pretty different businesses, and therefore they have pretty different needs in terms of how they operate and how these processes work for them. So the basics here are for our jobs within FieldFX. Wireline can have one job that can run on the order of weeks up to a month long. So they're going to have many tickets throughout the duration of that job that roll up into one job. Whereas cementing is going to essentially be a one-to-one relationship, one ticket, one job, and their jobs last in the order of maybe a day. So given that process, structure difference, our wireline process to the NetSuite sales order is going to have to create the sales order initially with the job, and then update it from multiple tickets throughout the timeline of the job. And our cementing division can essentially all be transmitted over in one shot. So the flexibility of Boomi has allowed us to separate out those processes and accommodate those differences. And the same thing with items. Wireline is essentially a service business for us. There's not a lot of inventory items to contend with. So we're really only going to have top level items or parent items in this situation. Whereas in cementing, it's a much more inventory heavy business. When we're talking about the slurries that have to be built and printed onto a ticket and loaded into separate trucks and delivered to location, and then that inventory has to be fulfilled within our ERP system. So there's a lot more complex inventory relationships within our cementing division. And we're able to build separate processes within Boomi that allow for those relationships to be maintained as they're brought over to FieldFX, and then vice versa on the sales order side. So this flexibility has allowed us to accommodate the different needs of our customers, whether really on the wireline side, where we have these long jobs, some customers want to be billed every 2 weeks. Some customers want to be billed just once at the end of the job. And we can accommodate that due to how we're able to build these processes. And having it segmented like this allows us to really reduce the time it takes to troubleshoot and the time it takes to run a process manually. So if we have an issue with just wireline item sync and we need to kick off just that, we can run their process, and it limits the amount of data that has to be processed and transferred in the integration. So that can occur much more quickly than if we're trying to process all items across both subsidiaries. I think that's enough preface information to get things started off. So I'm going to hand it off to Victor Perez here to go into the actual demo.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Victor Perez. I am the manager of operations applications with 9Energy. What I'm going to demo for everyone today is how we leverage Boomi to kind of maintain a single source of truth, which is our ERP system inside of FieldFX. So to get started, we're going to take a look at our ERP system. Here we're inside of NetSuite. I'm looking at an inventory item record, and I've pre-filled some information, required fields that we would want to push across to the system. By using our ERP system to kind of manage that single source of truth, we can push over our items, our accounts, and our employee records to set up that master data in FieldFX and make sure that we have employees to add to schedule and dispatching. We have items to add to tickets and quotes. And then we also have our accounts to reference for when we get back to invoicing. So with some of this base information, we have FieldFX sequence numbers and maybe the record type that we're using, as well as some information as far as quantities when we get down to breaking down a load sheet for cementing. Now with that, we also have some parameters that we've set up. So first and foremost, is it a Salesforce item? Do we want to push it? Later, when we get to scheduling and our processes run, the process will look for those parameters to be hit. And if it does meet those qualifications, then it'll query, pull those records, and then push it across. So making sure that these are checked off, this helps us to, again, maintain that source of truth and say, do we want to archive an item inside of FieldFX? Yes, with this edit, that will do that. So I'm going to go ahead and save this record. And I'm going to go ahead and push it manually using our Boomi process for pushing items across. As Ryan mentioned, we do have separate processes running for separate scenarios. Some of these maybe aren't as necessary as frequently as others. In this case, I'm going to run the inventory item. I'm going to manually start that. And now while that runs, I want to go through how this is actually happening and what is Boomi doing in the background. So first and foremost, we have our connector, which is our NetSuite connector here. And what that does is that allows us to tap into NetSuite and run a query for items or item objects within NetSuite, and then pull back any fields that we want to capture. So in this case, we're capturing IDs, we're capturing that FieldFX sequence number, and whatever other information that we need to get across. And then we're storing that information into a response profile. Well, this response profile is an XML profile that puts that data into a document so that we can later use it in our mapping to sort out and figure out where we want to push these fields. I mentioned parameters that we're using on process scheduling. So when you create a connector, you add your filters and you can say only pull records that have been modified after a certain date, maybe for a certain subsidiary, or is it even an item? Do we want to push this across, yes or no? So once we get our XML profile set up, we then go into mapping, as you can see here. So in this mapping, the simplicity of Boomi is that you can take that field from that XML profile that you set up, and it's just as easy as a drag and drop. So in this case, I drag and drop this internal ID from NetSuite to a NetSuite internal ID field inside of FieldFX. So this creates an external ID link between the two systems so that when we get to the other side of it, we want to say, okay, either update or create a record. It knows where to link these two. Within mapping, you're not always going to have fields that are either the same field type, or maybe the masking of a date time field inside of NetSuite isn't the same as a date time field in FieldFX. So you can actually utilize functions to kind of help you sort that information out. In this case, we're taking a FieldFX date time field and converting it into a mask that NetSuite would accept into its field. So I mentioned the external link. Once we do the mapping with that external link, what we're going to do is an upsert. Now the upsert is going to look to see if we do have a match between IDs within the two separate systems. Now if it does, it's going to go and update that record. If it doesn't, it's going to go ahead and create a brand new record and then pass the fields along to that brand new record. With that, right on time, this process actually finished, and you can see we have green within this test. So we got along past an additive item, and the upsert was successful. So if I go now and I look at this record that we pushed across, I'm going to go ahead and refresh. And I look at the Salesforce ID. I can see now that I have this ID of AAQ, or ending in AAQ. And if I go and I look at my FieldFX catalog items, and I do a refresh on my list, you can see that I actually did push that new demo item, and I should have all the information that I've mapped between the two systems. So I got that sequence number of 37, and here is that new demo item. AAQ is the Salesforce ID for this particular record. And if I went a step further and I look down here on that NetSuite internal ID that I had mapped, the item number is 827. And my external ID here, or internal ID for NetSuite, actually, sorry, is 827. So with that, I have a match between the two. Should I need to go back later and update a record, I don't need to worry about somebody on the operations end fumbling through it and messing something up. We can actually have somebody from the accounting side go in, just update NetSuite. And with that single update, it'll push this information. So maybe this 37 changes to, 100. And we can have the customer actually feel comfortable about what they're used to looking at. Maybe this was the wrong order, the sequence number on the printout for the ticket. They'll actually see it change as this is updated. So I've gone through previously and created some test records. As Ryan mentioned, getting that master data set up is essential for FieldFX. You need your accounts, your employees, your items. And if you're familiar with FieldFX, you know that setting up a catalog item gets you all the fields that you need down to not only your price book items, but also your ticket items and your quote items. So you can use those on tickets and quoting. Given that a field has the same API all the way down, all that information passes from the catalog to the price book to the ticket and quote items. So I set up a test item with some of these values, and I actually input that into a price book already. And so with that, it passed over some of that information as well. So this item is also going to carry that same sequence number and some of that description information. I also did set up a test customer, this Boomi demo customer, and then I went ahead and set up a job. So I mentioned earlier the parameters and the different processes that we use. So when I'm creating a service order, at this point, I'm going to push information from FieldFX back to NetSuite. I have this parameter set up to look, is this job going to be integrated? And if so, check this box. When our scheduled process runs to create a service order inside of Boomi, the first thing that it does is it looks for that checkbox. Once it sees that it's there, it creates a service order passing along any of this base information. What was the well? What was the type of job? Who were the engineers out there on that location? And I can see that on the service order. If I come and I look, service order 472, and oh, that NetSuite ID, sorry, 024, 024. So I can see that this information was passed along to the service order. I have that Wile E. Coyote job, and this was all run on the very first process, just to initially set up that parent record for the service order. Now, as this job progresses and we push the ticket out, our guys in the field, they did the work, they added the items, they got the signatures on location, and they marked it ready for approval. Somebody from our accounting side would say, okay, this, or somebody from management would say this ticket is ready for invoicing. When that happens, another scheduled process inside of Boomi is going to go and seek out any tickets that have been updated to show approved for invoicing, and then start bringing some of those items across. So when that happens, you'll see these items start showing up on our service order. And not only do they show up on our service order, but then Boomi actually writes back some information. So it says, you know, this item has already been sent to NetSuite. So should we have to troubleshoot, you know, something didn't come across in the integration, we can go through this list and look for anything that has not been sent to NetSuite yet. And then on top of that, we also get a NetSuite ID for it. So when we come through our service order and we're looking at the information that was passed back and forth, as that third process runs, creating the items, you can see now that we have that demo item with an input quantity of 6 totaling out to this amount. And not only do we have that, but we can also, like Ryan mentioned, maybe limit licensing to where somebody in accounting says, hey guys, this ticket item, ticket ID, you know, 1017673, there's something wrong with it. We need to, you know, remove this item and run it again. We can manually troubleshoot it that way, and then they can pass along, this is the exact ticket that it came from. All of this from the simplicity of Boomi, you know, creating that XML profile and then passing along fields with the simplicity of the drag and drop. So when we look at this scheduling, you know, some stuff isn't as important as others. Maybe we want to pass along accounts every 15 minutes, 20 minutes. We can schedule these processes to run at different times. Being a 24-hour service company, we might need all this information at different points of the day. So just making sure that it gets caught somehow, setting up a schedule and passing that information along so that ops has the resources they need to create a job and create a ticket, or maybe somebody on the sales side creating a quote. Should things fail, or maybe not necessarily fail, maybe we just want to see what's going on, Boomi also actually gives you a platform to come in here and look and see what scheduled processes have run, at what point of the day they did run, and however many items maybe got pushed across during those processes. So you can actually take this a step further and from the process log here, come in and say, okay, there was one document that got passed along, what was it? So I can go and break down and look and see exactly where either an error came from or what came across during a process's execution. And with that, that kind of, to bring this demo kind of to a close, I'd like to add that I myself am a novice user. I came into this kind of blindly, and we had, as Ryan mentioned, we had outsourced this integration build. Once they had completed that, using Boomi's learning library and their training documentation, and just kind of following along what was already built for us, as I mentioned, a novice user coming in, I'm able to catch the flow and pick up on how the whole process and scheduling and everything works. And it makes it really easy for somebody like myself, or being the low-code solution that it is, just come in here and be able to add a field to the mapping or help somebody from accounting get what they need to the invoicing process. So with that, thank you everybody for your time. I'm going to pass this back to Ryan.
All right, thanks, Victor. So just to conclude our portion of the presentation here, we wanted to review some of the lessons learned about our experience utilizing Boomi with FieldFX. So some of the things that we struggled with throughout our development of this integration, and some of these are going to apply to generally any kind of technology project, but the biggest things for us were to set clear and concise requirements from the get-go, get everybody to agree and on the same page. You may struggle with the tendency to want to build all of the bells and whistles into the platform all up front, and I would urge you to focus on what are your core requirements and get those up and running as soon as possible, so you can start to realize the benefits of the platform instead of dragging out an implementation over weeks and weeks and weeks, trying to get every single thing and appeal to every individual's needs. And I'm not sure if I actually don't think I mentioned this in my part of the presentation, but we did use a third-party group to jumpstart our integration with Boomi. Obviously, the plan for long-term is for us to manage it in-house, but we went out and worked with a third-party group to build the initial integration just so we didn't have to spend the time to get to speed ourselves. But there's really two ways of going about this, and you need to make the right decision for your organization, whether you go out and engage a third party to build it themselves, with you just giving them input and feedback as testing occurs, versus bringing in maybe a contractor and having them work with your in-house group that may provide you a little bit more knowledge transfer, and it may take a little bit longer. It may, I don't know how the cost would work out one versus the other, but two different approaches to it, and there's pros and cons to each depending on your organization. And then, of course, for any project, keep good documentation of your processes. Not everyone is going to have the time to dig into Boomi or to see what's going on there, or in the case of a handoff of responsibilities, having good documentation is just going to make that easier, especially 3 years from now, whenever we've made a bunch of tweaks and changes and those aren't reflected in any documentation that we have, maybe from the initial integration, and you're talking about something completely different 3 years from now than what we have documented. So having that and keeping up with it is going to be really important to the continuity of your organization. But with those lessons learned, that's the conclusion of our presentation.
Thanks, Ryan.
I'll hand it back to Emily. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Victor, for your demo. That was really fantastic. We are going to spend some time for question and answers. So if you have a question, you can put it into the question section on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will be happy to answer it. We do have a few in here. Question: we are planning to change our ERP. How hard is that with FieldFX and Boomi? Matt, you want to take that one?
Sure, Emily, I'll take that. So to change ERPs, Victor did a great demonstration of the mapping exercise between FieldFX and their ERP NetSuite. It's simply you would add a new connector for the new ERP, and you would go through the same exercise of not having to do a full mapping, but you would already know the FieldFX fields. You would now just be linking those fields to your new ERP, knowing what targets you're hitting. So essentially it becomes a new mapping exercise, as it were.
Okay, thank you. It looks like we have a question for 9 here. Do you plan to use Boomi to integrate to any other systems?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So yes, we do plan to use Boomi to integrate other systems. Namely, the next project we'd want to focus on is really integrating with our HR system. We use ADP for an HR platform, and we'd like to build that integration to help feed some of this employee information along and hopefully streamline the onboarding, offboarding processes for us. The timing of that's still up in the air given the state of the industry, but that's in the cards at some point.
Great. Next question, does Boomi offer a free trial? Matt?
Sure. So just like FieldFX, Boomi offers a free 30-day trial. You can even go on their website and register and sign up to initiate that process.
Can folks trial Boomi and FieldFX at the same time? That was my question, by the way.
They can, yes. They can do both. We would coordinate with Boomi as our partner on working together, both working on a trial of FieldFX and going through a Boomi trial environment as well to connect the two.
Cool. Well, I don't see any other questions here. Pause just a second in case somebody wants to ask one. But in the meantime, I will thank all of our speakers. Thank you to the entire 9 Energy Service team for being here and showing us how you guys are integrating FieldFX to your ERP via Boomi. That has just been really interesting to see. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. This webinar has been recorded, and so it will be sent out whether you joined us or not, and hopefully you can watch it on demand. And thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
All right. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks.
Thank you.